When I was a teenager in 1946-47, I was primarily interested in European arms and armor. I loved the medieval periods of the knights and all of that. Naturally, I lived in Pasadena, California, and you couldn't find European armor. And if I could find it, I probably couldn't have afforded it. So there was a man, Bernie Craig, who had been collecting Japanese sword fittings for a number of years, who lived close to me in Pasadena. And he had a little exhibit of his sword fittings at what we jokingly called the Pasadena Art Museum. So when I saw the exhibit, it kind of excited me. I thought, well, now maybe this is something, although I can't collect European militaria, maybe I can collect Japanese militaria. Well, this was a very auspicious time for me because the GIs had brought back so much of that material, so many swords and fittings and other material, that by 1947-48, they were in every antique shop. They were everywhere available. And a good sword guard cost $1, which I could afford. So I started buying a few pieces and probably formed maybe 50 tsuba, of which I had no knowledge at all. I didn't know if they were one from the other. Then I discovered that there was a book dealer in Pasadena who was very famous in Oriental art books. So I bought my first book from him, which was the Tsuba Taikon by Kawaguchi, which cost me $75, which was a huge amount of money at that time, and probably more than I'd paid for all the tsuba I had bought previous to that time. But the man who was in charge of the bookstore took an interest in me, and I was able to buy quite a number of books which were not as expensive as that one. So I gradually formed a little library and kept buying. By the time that I was 20, I was inducted into the Army and served in Korea, where I actually bought a sword guard in Korea. But I had 5 days leave in Japan at the end of 9 months service in Korea. And in Kyoto, I visited a tsuba dealer, Mr. Kusunoke, who sold me maybe 10 tsuba and a couple of very fine helmet bowls. So that was actually the beginning of my collection. By the time I was out of the Army and at UCLA in college, I had kept everything I had purchased up to that time. But I had nobody else to talk to, and finally, quite by chance, I went to a gun store and asked the clerk if they had any tsuba for sale, and the young man came tearing out of the back of the store, and he says, "Do you collect those things?" I said, "I sure do." And that was Bob Mose, who lived near me in Los Angeles and had been also collecting European armor and then Japanese armor and then sword fittings. Bob later became the director of the Boston Museum. But the two of us were the only collectors in Los Angeles until we met a man called Fred Martin, who collected just the swords. He didn't collect the fittings. So there were then three of us. This is probably 1959, somewhere just before that, in the late 50s. About that same time, there had been a society formed in Northern California of interested collectors, and a society formed in Southern California, both of them not overlapping. They were independent groups. We had probably 12 to 14 people at that time who were collecting, and we would meet in the various homes of the different collectors and show each other the material we had and discuss what we had. Unknown to us, the Japanese population, say in Los Angeles, had their own sword clubs, which were not allowing any foreigners to participate. But the Northern California Sword Club in San Francisco and that area, the Japanese private collections and collectors seemed to be very open to foreigners coming in, and so they mixed quite readily, and that's how I met John Yamamoto in San Mateo, a great expert in swords and fittings. But all of this culminated in my studies with Dr. T, and then after a number of years, I discovered that I had to do most of the study on my own if I was going to advance my knowledge. And by doing that, I was having very contrary ideas to the standard ideas of Japan and how to study. And even today, I'm more interested in how the piece appears to be and how it is fitting into the history of the study of fittings, what I judge to be the true age of the objects, and how the schools developed or were developed. That aspect of the fittings is not of much interest in Japan. There was one man who had a sword magazine. There were many clubs and magazines in Japan, all independent, hardly any of them ever crossing over to each other. But he wrote a magazine which was called Sword and History, Token Toreikishi. And I was able to, in my trips to Japan, to get some of the history of the fittings from him. But he was the only one I know of who had any real interest in that aspect of the study. I'm not particularly interested in the Edo period, certainly very little of interest after 1700. By 1850, why almost all the material was made for foreigners or for people who had no real knowledge of fittings in Japan. They were dandies and nouveau collectors, but the only way that I've been able to continue is with maybe 4 or 5 friends who think pretty much in the same way that I do, and we have corresponded and met over the years, but unfortunately they, for the most part, are gone now, so I'm on my own.